Thank you, Ariel. And I've written a few books in my time, but this is only the second time that I've had a book launch. And so maybe the way we're doing it is a great new trend. And certainly this book is pretty critical in the picture, because as some of you know, over the years, I've done lots of research, and sometimes it's interpreted well, sometimes it's misinterpreted, and trying to move away from telling teachers how to teach. Oh my goodness. And it is about how they think. And that's been a theme right throughout. And I'm getting, I think, a little better. And thanks to many of you on this session today, focusing on that thinking, focusing on that evaluative thinking, getting to better understand it, and carrying on great work from David Berliner and others that have looked at this over the years and bringing it back. And so I have a hunch that this is going to hit the mark. Certainly when we work with teachers, they much prefer to think, to talk, to hear about their thinking and their processing and how they interpret and how they understand what's happening in their classrooms and their evidence. And it came to me many years ago when I worked in the US with the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, and looking at the incredible ways that the teachers that come out really at the top of those assessments they do in terms of how they think. And as I'm trying to do, bringing expertise to the fore. I'm terrified actually with the growing amateurism in our schools. And I know in the US now that the US Labor Department have just announced the fastest growing group, occupational group of any over the next 10 years is teaching assistants. Now, I don't think that's the way we should be going. It should be the teachers, it should be the expertise, it should be the school leaders. And so, as you know, we've written a book in 10 Mindframes for teachers. And I wrote it in German actually with my mate Klaus Zara, and we released it there. And we had the luxury of having about a year of release, and we learned everything that was wrong with the book. And then when we translated and wrote it in English, that helped. And then the question that kept coming to me was, and being asked of me, is how do you frame this in terms of leaders? Now, I'm no expert in the research on school leaders. And so I resisted writing the book until my mate Ray said to me one day, well, why don't we get help? And so the luxury is we were able to ask the best in the world to contribute. And that's what certainly has come through in this. And I'm so pleased at the common language that comes through, the common messaging. And the thing I particularly like are the points of difference. We progress in this area through critique. We progress in this area of having different interpretations. And the fact that we can bring these interpretations alive and get to that notion that we address at the end about the just cause. So of the many books, this is one that I'm very proud to be part of, and I'm delighted that you were all part of it. And I want to thank the Corwin team, Mike. You have a great team, the consultants, the sales, the production, and I particularly want to thank my mate Ray, who prodded, pushed, changed, worked on things, not only with you, but particularly with me. And I'm hoping that this is really a true just cause. So what a great occasion today to actually hold the thing in your hand and see the fruits of the labours. And I trust that it leads to many other discussions, critiques, points of difference, and common language. So Michael, over to you, sir.
Thank you, John, so much. I've got product placement here in my office. This is the office that I share with my wife. Her desk is right over there. And once she realized that we were going to be here together and I was actually moving in, she's really thrilled about this bright light beaming right onto her head all day long. But we do so many of these, it's important to be able to talk about the fact that we're so proud of the work that you all do and that Corwin does. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. And some of the most important new titles are coming out this year and next. And Ariel, I want to thank you for the leadership that you've taken on in taking over this list and the thoughtful approach that you've taken in terms of getting the right stuff out to the right people at the right time. One of the things that we have said, and I think all of you have heard me said it, and if you haven't, you'll see it on our website, and we pronounce it proudly everywhere, which is our belief statements. And the first of those is that we believe that all children can learn. And when we say all, we mean all. And that really starts with the mind frames that leaders have. Do they truly believe that? How do they think about that? How do they approach it? And how are we making equitable choices for all students that are out there? This is such an incredibly important book in terms of the work that we're doing, and no more timely than right now in terms of what it is that's happening. We are in the midst of an unprecedented both crisis and opportunity. John talks about Build Back Better, which we certainly agree with in terms of how are we going to come back in terms of the work that we're doing. What is the essence of education? And it's the leaders that are going to help determine what it is that schools are going to look like. And this book is going to be influential in terms of what it is that we're doing. When I look at the folks that are here, I want to thank you so much for coming and joining us as we launch this very, very important book. Zaretta, it's great to see you. Peter and Jenny, Doug and Nancy, Jim Knight, folks that we work with on a regular basis, and obviously John, all of you thought leaders in terms of the work that you're doing. And if I can be so bold, Dylan, it's so wonderful to welcome you to the Corwin family and to see you here with us. We hope that we're able to be doing even more work with you in the future. To those of you who are consultants who are doing work and training, those of you who are helping us scale this work all over the world, we want to thank you. And to Ray, thank you for the prodding that you've done, the work that you've done in organizing this and keeping everybody and everything on task. On behalf of all of us at Corwin, here on this call and everywhere else, I want to say cheers. I wish we were together. I look forward to when we are together. And so thank you very much. Cheers. And New York will be playing in just about an hour or less. No, they're starting right now. I'll turn it back to you, Ariel.
Thanks, Mike. All right. So Ray, would you like to unmute yourself and read from our introduction? Ray, we can't hear you.
Got it. Sorry.
There we go. There we go.
Find the right button. Thank you. And thanks for everybody for taking time out of your lives to join each of our authors and John and myself on this book launch. So I've been asked to pick 2 or 3 paragraphs from the book to that might capture the essence of the book. And so I'm really kind of reading from the bottom of page 2 through page 3. It's the subsection entitled Simon Sinek and the Golden Circle, as I think that really captures the essence of what each of the authors and that John and I were hoping to capture in the book. And so the idea that one's thoughts about her or his impact of what they do precedes and guides their every action is supported in the work by Simon Sinek and his thinking within his book entitled Start With Why, How Great Leaders Inspire Everyone to Take Action. Now, in his book, Sinek underscores the idea that it is not just what or how you do things that matters. What matters more is that what and how you do things is consistent with your why, which is why a focus solely on practices alone, even on the high probability practices that are represented in MetaX, represents an incomplete recipe for success. Successful leaders talk about their why and prove it with what they do. The main question for these leaders is why something should be done. Answering this question leads them to the question of how to do something, i.e. the high probability practices, and finally to what or the results of those actions. Sinek more recently noted that leaders are not responsible for their results. Leaders are responsible for the people who are responsible for the results. And the best way to drive performance in an organization is to create an environment in which information can flow freely mistakes can be highlights and help be offered and received. In short, an environment in which people feel safe among their own. This is the responsibility of a leader. We argue that leaders are responsible for demonstrating their thinking about the importance of results, and we prefer impact to avoid any narrow notion of only or merely increasing test scores, as there are so many more important results than just test scores, for helping to ensure all have similar notions of what they're aiming to impact, and for the degree to which they're successful and want and need to be successful. Leaders should ensure that the resources needed for learning are provided for all to make the needed impact, and celebrating it when it occurs. Consequently, the complete recipe for success, as depicted in the slide that Ariel is showing you now, what Sinek refers to as the golden circle, success has its origins in the inner circle and the question of why, and then radiates outward from there by school leaders asking the questions of how and what. So Ariel, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, Ray. So in this next portion of time, we'll be hearing from each of the contributors to our chapters. And guys, we are a little bit ahead of schedule, so feel free to take maybe an extra minute or so. So Janet, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Always dangerous to say to a professor you have an extra minute. Look, I am so excited to be the first to talk about this, because I'm going to argue, as I'm completely biased, that evaluative thinking is pivotal to leadership entirely, and in fact to the 10 mind frames. And my downstairs occupant in this house constantly argues with me that there are 10 mind frames. And I go, well, there's one big one, and the 10 fit into that one big one. And I think this chapter, which promotes the idea of evaluative thinking, really attempts to put a script, if you like, for leaders to a cognitive process. So many people argue that it's really just about the thinking. And that's really hard for leaders and teachers to consider. Well, what do you mean? What's the deal? Look, even in the evaluation world, we have struggled to put something concrete to the notion of evaluative thinking. And evaluative thinking is the idea that you will constantly be searching for evidence, gathering evidence, synthesizing evidence, making some decision, and then a good evaluator will tell you that you must act on that decision. So it's a whole kit and caboodle, and that fits within the area of evaluation. But what we've done in this chapter is actually added some concrete ways of promoting evaluative thinking in a context, but also as a leader, making it a part of the daily activities. So it's cognitive, but it's also a doing thing. And these are the things that you can do, which I think has been really exciting. And fundamentally, what we've suggested is that evaluative thinking for leadership is a way of being. And your job as a leader is to ensure that you are gathering in all of your community, from students, teachers, to get them thinking in a similar way. Because for learning, evaluative thinking is core. So I love it.
Thanks so much, Janet. So Dylan, I believe you are up next. There we go.
Hi there. So you just seen I've posted a quote from a legend, which is at least 1,000 years old in Welsh, and really encapsulates my whole vision about leadership, which is that, as Ray already mentioned, people are successful, leaders are successful to the extent that other people do their jobs more effectively. And I've worked with lots of school leaders, and I know I'm in trouble when a school leader positions her or himself at the center of the school with everything else orbiting around them. And my wife was a high school principal for many years, and she described herself as a deflective practitioner, not a reflective practitioner, because she saw her job as stopping all the crap that rains in on the school from getting in the way of teachers focusing on improving what happens in classrooms. And so I think this idea of leaders as patrolling the periphery and allowing people to get on and do the work in the classroom, I think is very powerful. And in my chapter, I've just tried to draw out one example of this, which is really to actually try to reappropriate the word assessment. Because for too many years, assessment has been viewed as something that happens at the end of instruction rather than being an integral part of it. And I think there are two key ideas here. One is that teachers should get better quality evidence by asking better questions, by probing more deeply. And the other is that they should get more extensive evidence. So typically teachers make decisions about whether to move on or to repeat material based on information from just a handful of high achieving students. And so I think the major idea behind my chapter is this idea that if teachers have better evidence about what's going on in the heads of the students in the classroom, they will make better decisions that in turn lead to better learning. So it's a very simple idea, but what is radical, I guess, is thinking about these processes as assessment processes and try to reappropriate and to return the word assessment to something that makes sense at the heart of teaching. And in a way, the reason I'm so convinced that this is the priority for most professional development is I'm asking a very simple question. I'm asking teachers to reflect on two things. One is, what did I just do as a teacher? And two, what did my students learn? And looking at the relationship between those two things. And as long as teachers are reflecting in the relationship between what they did and what their students learned, which is at the heart of John's message of know thy impact, then I think it's highly likely that productive conversations and significant improvements will take place.
That's great. So well said, Dylan. Thank you. And so, Jenni.
Thank you, Ariel. So my chapter was around collaborating with my peers and my teachers about conceptions of progress and impact. And at the heart of this mind frame is the understanding that success lies in the critical nature of collaboration and really in the strength of believing that together we're capable of achieving great things. Some big ideas in the chapter include the importance of focusing collaboration amongst school and system leaders on the effects that they're having on improving the quality of classroom instruction and how they're shifting the narrative in schools from things like test schedules, photocopy budgets, and hiring procedures to a new narrative that's about high expectations, progress and achievement, and what impact means. And readers will find information including a definition and research about collective leadership efficacy. Ideas also include how leaders can provide opportunities for mastery learning for teachers and help teachers to set progressively more challenging mastery goals as part of their school improvement work and as a way to enhance collective teacher efficacy. The chapter is also about how school and system leaders play a key role in creating non-threatening, evidence-based, mastery-oriented school environments where the focus is on instructional improvement. And there's a checklist at the end of the chapter that includes things like school leaders believing in the power of the collective, school leaders help teams come to consensus on improvement goals, school leaders provide growth mindset-oriented feedback to teacher teams so that teachers make the link between their combined efforts and student outcomes. And finally, that leaders assess their own contributions to school improvement and seek, receive, and act upon feedback about their own leadership practices. Thanks, Ariel.
Thanks so much, Jenni. So moving on, is Michael on the line? I'm actually not quite sure if Michael was able to make it. He said that he would be able to be here, but sometimes you don't know. Things happen. So it doesn't look like Michael is on the line. So for those of you who have yet to read the book, I will just leave it for you to hear about that by reading it in the book. So let's move on, Zaretta.
Hi there. So I wanted to come at this through an equity lens. And I know we say we hold that, but I wanted to be really explicit about that. Because this chapter is about striving for challenge versus just doing our best. And when I looked at that through an equity lens, what it meant was, how do we help teachers move beyond deficit thinking about who's in front of them, who can learn and who can't, and how is doing my best translated to lowering expectations for students. So I really wanted to highlight the idea of leadership being able to move teachers to want to level up. How do we level up our practice in a way that puts students in the position to be leaders of their own learning? And so coming at this in the sense of understanding how leaders really have to be change managers with that strong understanding of the social political context, structural racialization. These things aren't neutral. So I wanted to lift those up, as that is the challenge that we have, is to bring teachers along. How do we reduce the cortisol, because change is hard, and increase the dopamine where they'll want to lean into that change? And so sharing the experience of Joe Truss, who's the principal that I talked about at the beginning of the chapter, really was an example of how that is an important element. And here's the thing I want to say, all the 10 frames are important, but they all have to be looked at through an equity lens. They are not neutral. There's nothing neutral about our education system. We know who's at the top succeeding. We know who's at the bottom. And if you don't address that, you're going to just continue to replicate. So the leader really does have the challenge of getting at mental models, helping people kind of change that thinking and shifting that thinking. And for an adult community, the adult culture in the school, that can be really hard, because we have a tendency to want strategies and quick fixes, when that really requires the leader to know how to lead others through change. So that's what people will find. And how do you go about that? Some tips for doing that, and a checklist as well for some of the things to consider as you think about change management through an equity lens.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Zaretta. And I think Joe, the principal that you highlighted in your chapter, is actually here too. So thank you so much, Joe, for being here. All right, so moving on to chapter 6, the 6th mind frame, we have Peter DeWitt.
Hi, thanks, Ariel. So, hello, everyone. Feedback is really interesting to me because as a former school principal and also somebody that does leadership coaching, I'll do walkthroughs or learning walks with principals, and I feel like feedback is sometimes very one-sided. And so when I started off the chapter, I wanted to tell a story. It's a common story, but what happens is that a principal will often say, we're looking for student engagement in our walkthrough. But the problem is they never talk about what student engagement actually means. So they go into a classroom looking for student engagement, and perhaps they're looking for compliant engagement, and the teacher is focusing on authentic engagement. And the principal may look at the teacher and say one of two things, which is, I'll come back when you're teaching, or we need to talk about your classroom management. And feedback is a very delicate thing to be able to provide. It means dialogue. I know that Doug and Nancy are going to be talking next about engaging in dialogue instead of monologue. And so in the book, I focused on 3 questions from John that we all know. Where am I going? How am I going? And where to next? And it's about also developing a common language and a common understanding with staff, but also engaging in that kind of dialogue in pre-conference meetings or during the observation and post-conference. The other thing that's really important to think about when it comes to feedback, and something I wanted to be able to focus on, is the credibility of the leader. You know, when it comes to instructional leadership, it's a very small focus. It's a focus on learning. And we know that leaders have to balance between instructional leadership and management. But if they get that instructional leadership piece wrong, it can have a devastating impact on their school climate. So one of the things that I wanted to be able to focus on too is this idea of credibility. Does the leader actually have credibility to provide feedback and engage in that kind of dialogue with teachers? In fact, Zaretta said it best too when she was just talking about the equity lens, and not just about strategies that you can provide, but it's really about having that deep dialogue in order to give proper feedback. So throughout the chapter, I talk about observations, walkthroughs, what those can look like. Those are things that most principals around the world engage in. And then we ended with the idea of looking at the pre-observation meeting and the post-observation meeting. And it's really about making sure that the feedback provided to teachers is not a one and done and not one-sided, but it's truly about the dialogue and the ongoing learning. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter. All right, Doug, Nancy, and Dominique.
Well, thank you, Ariel. I was invited to a party, and parties have music. So congratulations to this and celebration to the authors and editors of this terrific volume. And we were invited to talk about engaging in dialogue and not monologue, not just telling teachers things. And that's an awesome position for us to be in because we care so much about students talking to each other and balancing that and not the dominating ways. But as school leaders, I think it's super important that we always recognize that we have to engage in dialogue to create the school situations, the environments we're looking for. So I'll invite Dominique on the first one. Now, the collective efficacy is part of this chapter, but Jenni talked about that, and then Peter built on that. Collective efficacy builds across this. That's one of the things leaders do, and we build collective efficacy as we talk to each other.
So as Doug said earlier, celebration and party, this is the best party I've been at in a while. So thanks for everybody joining. It's good to see everybody. But in the chapter, we're talking about trust and how that trust can deliver and create a climate that's a little bit different. And when we start to talk about dialogue, it's the conversation and that equitable voice for everybody a part of our organization, students and staff, where everybody can start to have a voice when we're starting to have those conversations. And I think that's the beauty of being a site principal right now is I don't need to have the strong voice. I need to hear what my teachers think. I need to hear what my students think. I need to hear what my staff think. And we allow that dialogue to happen. And when we think about the Mindframe, that allows us to create a climate that's different than others. And I'm hoping that will be where people start to really read this chapter and say, you know what, we're doing that, or we can create that.
And an outgrowth of that, a product of that kind of climate where dialogue is really valued, is the practice of micro-teaching, which we know has a great influence in terms of student learning, but also teacher learning as well. And micro-teaching, and we discuss this in the chapter, is a process where a teacher chooses a segment of a video that he or she has made of themselves in order to be able to ask questions, pose questions to colleagues about it. It is meant to be a time where colleagues come together and co-construct that content knowledge. It's not to evaluate the teaching of a colleague. It's always identified by the teacher what the purpose of it is going to be and what the inquiry is going to be about. It's not identified by others. That teacher is the one who directs the instruction. There's a tremendous amount of trust that goes along with that, as Dominique was talking about. And the teacher is the one who is asking, especially for that feedback, and the role of everybody else is to just pose those mediating questions to get the teacher to be able to think about that question that they were wondering about. All of this rolls forward, creating that climate of equity, building on trust among students and among staff, come to some really material ways in which we foster dialogue among one another and not just monologue.
Thank you guys, I appreciate it. All right, here we go, Laura.
Hey, thanks again. Yes, my chapter is on successful impact and what that looks from the outset. And if I'm going to sum up my chapter in one word, it's clarity. And clarity really as the key to outstanding performance, and not just for students. You know, oftentimes as school leaders, we skip over the most important resource we have in the school, and that's teachers. So this is clarity and performance for teachers on behalf of school leaders. So as a former school leader and district leader, you know, just as we ask our teachers to make learning intentions and success criteria visible for students at the start of a unit, at the start of a lesson, you know, at the start of the year, as school leaders, that's our responsibility too, right? Is to make those learning intentions and success criteria visible for teachers at the start of the year, and then using those throughout the year to optimally impact student learning. So teachers should know, just like students should know, like at any given time, what's the most important work that they can do to contribute to student success and how they're doing at it. So as a school leader, to me, this means really two things. The first thing we've got to do is we got to know in the fall, and we have to define this with teachers, where we want student performance to be in the spring. And then secondly, as school leaders, we've got to put the structures in place to guide that teacher performance throughout the year. And we can't just outsource it to teacher evaluation or observers of teachers on a rubric to help them meet those student performance goals. So again, for school leaders, this means that we've got to move away from real communicating ambiguous expectations. You know, oftentimes we even see them still written in evaluation rubrics, such as, you know, build positive classroom culture, or, you know, teachers, I want you to create engaging work, or I want you to, you know, use data to inform instruction. And, you know, while none of these messages are wrong, they're just, their ambiguity really leads teachers to decide what that means in translation. And as we know, I know some of us have been high school leaders, and you might have 150, 200 different individuals that translate that and could make really inaccurate conclusions based on that, those messaging, and work in non-productive ways, and ask our students to work in non-productive ways, because the success criteria for both students and teachers are either one, not present, or they're not specific enough to guide teachers' work and really make an impact for kids. So the mind frame, you know, cultivating this mind frame in my chapter is really clearly defining the success criteria at the start of the year with teachers, and then actually using it throughout the year to give structure to teachers' work, right? What specifically, you know, which of the visible learning strategies will be used that we co-commit to using and giving feedback on throughout the year. And so this is really a commitment to a communication process that's more focused, for greater clarity, and just having a greater impact on kids. So to read more, you'll have to read the book.
Perfect, thanks, Laura. All right, so for chapter 9, Sugata Mitra was unable to join us tonight, but his chapter was on building relationships and trust so that learning can occur in a place where it is safe to make mistakes and learn from others. And he has a really great story in there from his own experience in school. So again, you'll have to read that in the book itself. But so then we will move on to our 10th mind frame from Jim Knight.
Hi, everybody. I'm looking at all these folks here, and I just can't believe how many good friends are in all those little windows. And I really rather we were just listening to the music and kind of having a good time rather than listening to me. But I'll keep it short. But on every row, there are tons of people that I consider really good friends, and then others I really can't wait to become friends with. So thank you all for being here. I'm honored to be a part of this. I feel kind of funny summarizing the mind frame that I did when John's sitting right there, and he's the one who's written so much about the mind frame. But mine is the idea that I focus on learning in the language of learning. And there were a number of concepts that were important. There's a big emphasis on Piaget, and the idea that learning from Piaget's perspective involves cognitive structures and then experiences that create disequilibrium that kind of change our cognitive structures. And if you wanted to simplify it so I could understand it, change our stories. We have to have these experiences that expand our stories so we see the world in a bigger way. And so, all right, sorry, that was a little disequilibrium right there, just to give you a picture of it. So another thing is that students come to class with different prior knowledge and different contexts. And learning is about meeting students where they are, recognizing where they are, and then creating situations, ideally self-directed, where they can have the learning that Piaget talks about. They have these experiences that cause disequilibrium and move them forward. And so it'll be no surprise to you, if you know my work, that I use coaching as my example. And I said, one of the things coaching is it's as my friend Christian Van Nuremberg says, it's a managed conversation. And so what the coach does is create a situation where people inevitably will have to change their stories about their experience. That often involves very practical things, like perhaps video recording the classroom or looking at student work to see performance, but getting a clear picture of current reality. And usually that clear picture of current reality creates that disequilibrium that Piaget talks about. And so to have a conversation, I mean, there's a reason why we have defense mechanisms. It's hard to face reality. And so to have a conversation that takes you out of your cognitive structure or your mind frame and move you forward, in many ways, that's the role of the coach, to help you see, yeah, I thought these kids were learning, I thought they were succeeding, but now that I look at reality, a lot has to change. And the coach is there to make that happen through creating a safe place, through engaging in genuine dialogue where both people's voices are heard, and creating a setting where people's stories change, and consequently students' stories change and students learn more. So I think those are the things I wanted to say. I had lots of time to think about it because I was last. So thank you all for inviting me, though. As I said, it's great to be a part of this.
Thanks so much, Jim. That's a perfect way to sum up our 10 mind frames. And I love your microphone, so professional. Would any of the speakers or authors like to say just a couple last thoughts, and then we'll have some Q&A time.
Well, I'll say I'm grateful to Ray for pushing John to do this, and I'm grateful for John to doing the work. It's good to see you again, John. And then I'm grateful to everybody else who's contributed to this. Your contributions are clearly transcend this book in gigantic ways, but you're all making such a difference for kids. So I'm thankful to everybody, just to say something.
This notion of how school leaders think, I think is a very worthwhile notion. And there's, as someone mentioned earlier, there's a tremendous number of aspects of education that we're not even covered in this. And Zaretta, your point about thinking in the mind frame you have with an equity lens, that is so powerful. So my challenge to you all is, how do you take what's a chapter and not only necessarily make it a book, but make it a movement so that we get away from telling teachers what to do, telling school leaders what to do, but help them understand in terms of their thinking. The challenge I've given myself, in fact, my son and I are working through a book now on 10 mind frames for parents. So that's one part of it. And there are many other aspects right across the various things. So I hope, my wish would be the book will be successful when you and others pick up these ideas in here and have that relentless focus on that expertise of that thinking. And as you said, Janet, that evaluative thinking. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Again, Ray, thank you. I didn't mention Ariel at the start, who, as we all know, sits behind the scenes. And if you want to know anyone that prods and pushes and has the most gentlest way of telling you you're wrong and fixing it, she's the master of that. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for the party.
Thanks so much, John. All right, and with that, we will say good night or good day to our friends in Australia, but thank you again for being here. It's really an honor to celebrate the launch of such an important book with all of our closest friends and family and colleagues. So thank you so much, everyone.